Good afternoon, Amit. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Rajiv. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely.
How
You know,
are
we've
you?
been we've been wanting to come on this event for a while, and we missed you in the earlier season for official reasons and otherwise. But glad to have you finally on season three of Leaders and Libraries.
Happy to be here. Thank you. And yes, Rajiv, I wanted to kind of be well prepared for this, and kind of I've observed your sessions and kind of learned a good deal from that. So very happy to be here finally in season three.
Lovely, lovely. You know, you and me connected many years back, and we've been conversing, meeting, and doing a lot of stuff. But it's always nice to come and talk about something that connects both of us very passionately, and the word is book. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, super. So let's get started. As the format, I have to formally introduce you, though you are well read and followed on LinkedIn, but let me still take the opportunity to do that here. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whichever part of the world you're going to be when you are going to listen to Amit when it gets posted on LinkedIn. We have yet another guest on Leaders in Library Season 3, Mr. Amit Jha. Over 2 decades of experience in the space of learning and development, leadership development, strategic HR, has converted organizations into profit centers very passionately, is currently the Vice President and Head Talent Development for Fidelity Investments India, a book lover, somebody who's very passionate, like all L&Ds are, in impacting lives and eventually impacting organizations. We met many years back on a different format where I was working in an organization and I went and met him, presented our earlier organization's consulting practice. That's how we got connected. And since then, we have been posting and commenting and liking each other's work on LinkedIn. And we keep talking about the books that we read for each other. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Amit, and talk about a very, very powerful book that I'm going to show in a moment from you. So thank you. Welcome on board.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you for that introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. All right. The book we want to talk today is a book of which Indra Nui is also a huge fan of, and she loves the author a lot. And she has mentioned about him enviously saying, how can you come up with these kind of thinking? I could never do that. That's the kind of an author this guy is. And the book is Think Again by Adam Grant. And whether it is Think Again or whether it is Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, or whether it is Originals or whether it is Give and Take, you pick up any of the books of Adam Grant, they're very, very powerful. And they're very insightful. People who have not read Adam Grant or have read just one book of Adam, you should pick up all of the books written by him and read them. They are fantastic. And today we're going to talk about this powerful book. So thank you, Amit, for choosing this fantastic book that has not been spoken by any leader in all the earlier seasons. So thank you for that.
It's a book that really appealed a lot to me, and when you approached and we said we should do something, I thought this makes like the best sense in terms of a book that I'm able to connect very nicely to in terms of the lessons that are there, right? And also one reason why I kind of picked this book was to do with a lot of my this 20-25 years of work experience. Now that I am seeing the concepts in the book, I'm able to connect them back to, okay, these were the mistakes that I made at that point of time when I was not thinking, right? So all of those things that I have done long back are now becoming much more clearer for me when I'm reading what this book is kind of talking about. And I think that way it's good. And we've been doing some sessions internally in our organization also based on these books, and kind of, it's a very favorite book for a lot of people. So that's I hope our readers are able to, our listeners and everyone that's watching is able to gain something.
Sure, absolutely. I think I've started off with a very powerful input to all the young leaders that books are one of the best sources for clarity of thoughts. It can help you to figure out and do better of what you've been doing in the past. So I think that's a great input. So I'm going to start with the first one at you, Amit, straight. You've been reading for years and you have a lovely library as a background. Tell me, how did your association with books start? How early was it, and how did the journey move on to where you are today?
Yeah. So interestingly, Rajiv, my book reading habit is not a very old habit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very old habit. For the first 8-9 years of my professional experience, I don't think I was at all into books, right?
Okay.
And I'll tell you the reason for it. So I have had 2 or 3 switches in my career
Mm-hmm.
throughout. I started my career with the hospitality industry. I finished my hotel management from IHM Mumbai and got in as a management trainee and worked through many different hotels and restaurants and all of that. In that era, the way our life was, the way our day to day was,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that helps you and that you are reading is probably your organization manuals, because there are manuals for every set system, because that's how things work in the hotel industry. You run an equipment, there's a manual for it. You're trying to do a recipe, there's a recipe for it. And you don't really deviate from the written word, and you try and stick to it as much as possible. So you're trying to run a large QSR format organization. There's a set system on how things will work, right? So all of my time and effort was kind of trying to imbibe the learnings from these manuals and go ahead and put that into use. And as I grew through the system, a lot of it was to do with writing those manuals and revising those manuals and things like that. So was there any reading around leadership development or how to be a better manager or how to be a better leader of organizations? No, not at all. And it's sad. It's probably something that if I had done at that point of time, probably I would have gained a lot more, right? So all of this started once after my hotel industry. I kind of took some changes of that and I came into running a large operations organization. And that's when my kind of study habit of, okay, I see people around me reading and talking about books. I have not really done some of this. And I'm almost going back to many, many years ago.
Right.
Then I kind of started picking, okay, let's pick the best read books, the best read management books, self-help books and things like that. And what can I gain out of that, right? So I would say probably all of this is over the last about, I don't know, 18, 19 years or so that
Lovely.
now I've actively been into books and all of that. And also just to tell you, I'm not somebody who's very comfortable with listening or audiobooks or reading a PDF of a book. For me, books need to be physically that I can hold in my hand. I'm still a old thinker in that. And yes, I mean articles and business publications, HBR and things like that. Obviously, you have to consume that in the electronic way. And that's wonderful. But when it comes to a book, I try and get a physical copy wherever possible.
You actually brought 2 points that I want to share. Is one, I'm also not a Audible guy, and I downloaded the app, and I really can't. It doesn't register in my head. So I'm more into audio format when I'm on the spiritual learning format. But when it comes to leadership and self-help, I still prefer a physical book. Sometimes a Kindle, which is for my fictional reading. Other than that, it's all good. So I can relate that. Second, hotel management. I've always had huge respects for that industry because today I'm an engineering graduate. I didn't do anything in engineering, so just a graduate. And then I'm doing a lot of work in the leadership space. There was a time when I wanted to get into hotel management by looking at the show. I said, "Hey, banna hai." My dad was okay for it. My mom was not okay because I come from a vegetarian family. He said, "नहीं नहीं kitchen में non-veg पकाना पड़ेगा इसको." So let him not get into hotel management. I almost brought forms and filled it. My mom said, "No." She stood at the door and said, "No, dad and son, you're not going through this route. Pick up a different route." So I could always, I've done a lot of work for the Oberoi group. I've done a lot of work for the Leela group. I've always awed that industry. I always felt that behind the door, what mess and muck happens because of the sheer longevity of work, a lot of things that happens. But the moment they come on the floor, they're just fabulous and fantastic. I always love that.
Yes, that is always the case with. Okay, is my connection kind of a bit weak right now?
It's getting a little weak now. Seems to be coming back.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I mean when you're dealing with hotels, what you see in the front of the house is very different from the back of the house, right? And the realities are very different on both sides of the border, what the customer sees and what you don't see. But yeah, it's a very hard, grueling life. It does seem very fascinating and very, very romanticized version of an industry that, oh, you're always wearing a suit and having the most fantastic food that you can ever, but there's a lot of very hard work and a lot of grit that you need to survive in that industry.
I completely understand that. Super. Let's get into the book. I'm going to talk about this into three segments:
Sure.
individual rethinking, interpersonal rethinking, collective rethinking are the three rethinking buckets in which the book is also beautifully written. And when I read them, multiple things resonated in my head, but I thought let's pick up two from each of them and talk about that. And that's what I want to have a chat with you today. So I'm going to talk about a couple of phrases that caught my attention. And these authors have this knack of joining words and coming up with phrases that just hits you like a bullseye. I could never do that. If I could, I would have become an author and not doing this session on a book, right? That'll be somebody is doing a work on my book. But coming back to Adam, let me start with the first one. Before I start with the first one, I'll take a step back. I was very happy to talk on this book because one of the fundamental pillars of leadership elements organization is we challenge the immunity to change in leaders and organizations, and we create thinkers and leaders. That's the what of the organization. So for me, the 10-degree, 15-degree thinking shift, if we can create in minds of leaders, a lot of action can happen. The best version of the individual can come out as a huge belief that I have. So for me, it's all about thinking, right? And hence, uh, Adam also is talking about something called rethinking. So let's talk about that through this entire talk. First one, he says, don't stop unbelieving. He talks about a cycle of thinking, which is a very powerful concept. What has been your biggest leadership lesson from this?
So that's a really, really very powerful quote, right? And when you read it first time, you think, am I reading it right?
Correct.
Are you supposed to read "Don't Stop Believing" and has he made an error, or am I seeing things? Right? And when you read it in more detail, that's when you kind of figure that how the piece kind of really comes along, right? So the pieces that I kind of connected most to it and kind of thought about is he spoke in the book about this whole another quote that I'll use from there, which is, if knowledge is power, knowing what we don't know is wisdom. Right? And I thought that was really, really powerful. Right. So the whole idea of how our biases take over, right? And there's something that Adam's kind of spoken in the book about first instinct fallacy, that our tendency is to believe that our first thought or idea is the closer to truth than revised thoughts, ideas, and answers. Right? And I can think of two examples that are kind of interrelated in this that I have experienced in my own leadership journey over the years. So the first of it was the power of putting someone in a role or a position who's actually a non-traditional candidate for the role. Right. And over the years, as I told you, my career itself was in three different trajectories. So I was in the hotels first for a long time, and then spent some time running a large operations call center, ITES enabled services kind of a business. And then in HR and leadership development and talent for the last about 15, 16 years now. So all of these steps that I have taken from one to other have been where I have somebody has had faith on me as a non-traditional candidate to come and do something in that area.
Right.
Like my switch from operations to HR was also such a switch. And my own rethinking that has happened there is, right, like in terms of this whole curiosity, discovery, humility, and doubt, I would mostly be on the doubt side. I would doubt things a lot. And I would kind of second guess myself. And sometimes in my early parts of the career, I was very quick to make a judgment when something was decided by the organization. I would think, oh, this will never work. I was one of the first ones to say this will never work. And that was because I was too rooted to my conviction about why this will never work. And then there were 3-4 instances when I saw the organizations that I worked for picking a candidate that was coming from a totally different industry to lead a piece of work. And though everyone was skeptical, somebody in that organization had faith. And then it worked. And it worked out beautifully well. And that has given, a lesson to me that rethinking that. And as I told you, Rajiv, right, a while before when we chatted, that my lessons from Adam Grant's book are not more about, okay, here is how I succeeded. It's all about here is why I failed. And now I understand them better. Right? In terms of these were the errors in my thinking. And that's why probably thinking again is a better thing to do.
Very true.
So as I told you, this manifested in two methods. One is me starting to pick people from non-traditional backgrounds for roles that were on my own team, right? Or roles that we were hiring for as an organization. And the second thing that it helped me is it helped me navigate my career from one industry to another industry, right? Thinking more about what is it that is a set of skills that can be transferable to that other industry, right? And kind of understanding, I mean, instead of getting into biases, confirmation or desirability biases, kind of using an overview effect of what really helps in this, and therefore go and make a pitch for a role that you're interested in and say, okay, here is a role. And happy to say, Rajiv, that 2 times I was picked for a role that was greenfield. And this has happened because of my organizational leadership, that they were able to kind of pick me up for a role which was not there before. And I had to literally say, okay, if this is what I need to do, what should be my JD looking like, and where will my responsibility start and where will it start? And those were the most wonderful roles of my career, Rajiv. So I think I can say that.
Lovely. So in one sentence, what would be the advice to the young leaders from this phrase, don't stop and believe?
I think if I have to put that in one sentence, I would say that, you should second guess yourself. You should not stop at doing that. And if you have written down a choice that you want to make, or if you have kind of understood this is the thing, talk about it to somebody who you think is just absolute skeptical about this, right? And say, here is what I have decided. Can you dig holes in what I've decided? And have this very nice conversation with someone, see what comes up, and then kind of see if there is any change or pivot that you want to make to your conversation. Right? I mean, this happens even for feedback, Rajiv, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, if the organization has a feedback tool of some type and they tell you to pick up people for feedback, we tend to pick up the most people with whom we have the most congenial relationships. Try and pick 1 person, 2 person, 3 people who you do not have a great relationship with, who have opposed you publicly before. Your love will be much more immense.
I agree.
Right? It's an uncomfortable thing to do, but try doing that and we will gain a lot.
Very true, very true. At least you don't want to be in the good books always, right? You want to be in the real books of people. Yeah, lovely. Let's go to the next one. And I like this quite a lot. And the phrase is the joy of being wrong. And he very nicely talks about attachment issues. And I like that phrase there. What, according to you, is Adam talking about? And what should the young leaders practice here?
Yeah. So on this attachment issues, right? And I know you're asking me what should the young leaders do. If you ask me, the attachment issues are more at the higher levels of the organization, right? So it is all of us that have to do, and I'm guilty of it majorly. And as I told you, I'll talk about. I mean, first of all, what do I think the author is saying here is like this whole aspect of detaching your present from your past, right? Is one thing, which is if you have to let go of beliefs that you've held previously, right? Including what you think about life, what you think about the way people react or the way people act, or why do people do something, right? And then your identity will kind of keep on changing and you will not be the same person. But to kind of writing it down on what you have succeeded in and what you have failed in 1 year, right? trying to gain something out of that is a very interesting aspect, right? And so, for example, people who know me from my hotel days 25 years ago and who see me today, they say, you're a totally different person now. And I only say that I hope that's in a good way, right? And I know there are things that I was absolutely horrible at in terms of managing people or running my teams that have changed over the years. I'm not saying I'm anywhere close to perfect, but that will change more. And the second is, if you are open to new information and evidences, right, that may challenge your deeply held beliefs, right, then that will help. And I kind of, one of the examples that I can kind of talk about the attachments is, right, like, and as you know, Rajiv, today, our country and politics and all of that is also very polarized, right? There are very strong views on one side versus the other side and things like that. And one of these suggestions that I give is kind of to build a growth mindset around here and not be to the attachment you used. Listen to the other side. Read some newspapers that are different than the usual ones that you read, or subscribe to a journal that talks of a concept that you don't believe in. And see, maybe it will give you some insight where, you know, you will start thinking slightly differently and your own mindsets will change, right? And there's a personal example that I have of this whole attachment thing, and I'll tell you how it comes in the way. It's very difficult for us as a leaders to keep our own thing aside and believe in what your team is saying, right? So as I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of podcasts.
Okay.
Right? I'm not a big fan of listening books. I mean, the only thing that I listen to really is music, right? Beyond that, not anything for knowledge. It's not in my person to do that. So my team, sometime back, kind of brought up a solution for an event that was totally to do with audio, and there was no video, there's no conversation. It would happen on, a platform like this.
Okay.
And my first reaction was, this will never work. And I don't think people will like this. Right? And kudos to my team. They stuck at why they want to do that. And they said, no, let's try it out. And I said, okay, let me for once kind of, detach myself from this thing that this will never work and let them do it. What is the harm? Let's try it out. And believe me, the way the team executed this and the way the team I just gave them the green signal at one point of time after one meeting or two meetings. And we said, okay, fine, go ahead. And just run it the way that you would like. I will not interfere. And as leaders, one of the key things that we can do is get out of the way.
Very true.
Let them do, because then only you will see what the potential. Believe me, Rajiv, I was so pleasantly surprised by the whole success of this. It was a fantastic event. It went really well. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed it. The engagement level was through the roof. And other parts of the organization then came to our organization. How did you do that? Tell us more. And now somebody else has replicated that in there.
Oh, nice.
So, right, it was beautiful that I was proven wrong. So the joy of being proven wrong is something that I experienced really well. And this is a small example, but it really worked wonderful. And I think as leaders, what we need to kind of be open to is tell your team clearly about this. I was against it. You guys proved me wrong, and this is how it helped us.
Very true.
Because if we think or we sulk and we get into this ego mode that my team has proven me wrong, so how will I show my face to others? That's not what it is. And it has made our relationship also much more stronger. Right? When we are open to such vulnerabilities between us. Right? And this is just a tiny example.
It makes sense. I mean, when you said, you actually pulled the word out of my mouth. So when I was reading this and read the book, I could relate to the vulnerability word that Patrick Lencioni talks about in the 5 Days Function. I could relate to Jim Collins talking about level 5 leadership, which is all about humility and will in good to great. So it's all about that humility and the willingness to accept the fact that I'm open to enjoy that I'm wrong. And it calls for a huge amount of courage and conviction to do that, right? I think it's a great point. Thank you for bringing in. I think if leaders who are on their own path of leadership can start doing this early on, I'm sure you and me realized it later in life, they would realize it much earlier. So it's good for them. Yeah, absolutely. That takes me to the third one, which is very interesting. Now, an individual rethinking happens, then you work in organization which is all about people around. You're not that Martian all alone in that Mars planet. You're on planet Earth, so you've got people around. A lot of interpersonal thinking and rethinking has to happen because I think collective genius comes out when there is interpersonal rethinking. From that angle, which is my belief. This phrase is interesting. Dancing with foes. People shudder dancing with friends. He talks about dancing with foes. What are two or three advices that you would like to give from your own learning? Let's understand that.
Yeah, Rajiv. So this is something. Again, my lesson is see it more in failures than in successes in this aspect, right? Um, I'm very happy to kind of talk about that right now to you and kind of give you that whole piece on how this happened. So what this book kind of speaks about is right that when we are trying to persuade people, we sometimes take a very adversarial approach, right? And which is like we shut our own minds to new ideas, and we also effectively shut them down or rile them up when we take that kind of a opinion on things, right? So what I kind of gained out of this is that there is this whole art of persuasive listening, right? Which is there that okay, can you listen to somebody's point of view and try and absorb it, right? And I'm a fan of this piece that I read somewhere, which was about every meeting that we do. Can we have a 30-second pause after one person has spoken? Wow. So suppose you and I and 5 others are in a meeting and I have a point of view. Okay, here is what I think, and I say something. Then for the next 30 seconds, nobody else speaks. They absorb what we said and think about it, and then we react to it. Because otherwise, what will happen in meetings is somebody will say a point, and while they are saying, you're already making your counter arguments against it. And the moment they stop speaking, you are like, but here is what I think. And here is my totally different view. So that whole art of persuasive listening is kind of important, right? And questioning how rather than why. And there is this one very powerful question that Adam has spoken about, that ask them what evidence would change your mind. I don't think we ever speak like that in a meeting, that what evidence will change your mind, or what if you see you will get more convinced about it. And then if somebody is taking a stance which is probably not the right stance, maybe that helps them rethink it. Or maybe if they offer you if the answer to that is, sorry, no evidence is going to change my mind, then there's no point having that negotiation. Then you need to kind of call it a lose win and just move out from there.
Very true.
Right? And just asking themselves, like, why do you say so? Like, how have you formed your opinion? And trying to understand that, right? And also going with lesser arguments than what you have. Stick to one or two key arguments and kind of talk about that. So there's a very fascinating conversation in the book that is there that readers can probably look at, is how a brilliant debater is pitched against a robot and what happens, right? There's a lovely definition of that. So that's worth, and something that I can tell you of my own failure about it is, I remember there was a heated discussion about a topic that was happening in my organization, and somehow the room changed to such a situation that it was me against a whole lot of people.
Oh my gosh.
And I was not convinced with whatever was being done, and everybody else was convinced. And at some point of time, I kind of said a few things that I should not have. Right? And I was raging with, and I said something like, how come you guys are not able to see this as such a simple point? And obviously that is going to put everyone totally against you, right? And nobody's willing to. Thankfully, this was many years ago, and therefore I learned a lot from that experience later on. At that point of time, I thought I was absolutely right, but I was completely wrong on that aspect, especially in the way I kind of took that conversation. So after reading this book, these kind of experiences of all the errors that you've done kind of come back, and now not to do that anytime again.
Very
Right.
true.
So yeah, and I guess it's also to do with the kind of industry that you come in. Like in the hotel industries, everything really happens because you need to follow processes, and if people do not follow processes, you need to kind of correct them in a way that is not typical of organizations like the kinds that we work today. It's slightly different there, right? Because your population is different and there is no time to lose. You need to quickly make decisions and move on. There's no, okay, I'm going to relegate this decision to another day and we are going to do that, because everything is very quick. And that probably does not give you enough time to kind of think about the leadership aspects and the people management side of it so much more than the operational urgency of doing things.
Very true.
And that's why I'm saying I'm a very, very different person today than what I was many, many years ago.
So for all the leaders, the input is listen more.
It is listen more, and it is also about look for the common ground. Like look for, because the person that you're negotiating against is not your enemy, right? It's looking for common ground and express the curiosity on why do you see this? Why don't you see merit in this proposal? Why don't you? What evidence will change your mind?
Yeah,
asking these questions will kind of help you, right? And kind of talk about also there's another concept about that logic bullying doesn't work, right? And I was probably a logic bully at some point. Is what I kind of learned from this.
Yeah. Very true, very, very true. No, I remember an episode where I was in the boardroom pitching to a client, and we had the CHRO sitting in, and we had the head of retail sitting there, and the chief operating officer also was sitting there, and we were talking. And I was talking about thinking shifts, and we get participants to think differently, do a few things. And we were talking, and he said, "Good." Then we came to certain elements, and I said to the retail head, and I don't know, it sounds very audacious now, but I think it helped me clinch the deal fascinatingly. So what happened is we were talking, and I said, you know what, I'm talking about changing the behavior by clearly telling them what you're doing is wrong, and this is how you should do differently. Give them tools. For example, currently in the last 30 minutes, you have not been a good listener. He said, why do you say that? I said, 1, 2, 3, 4 behaviors of yours that you have been displaying for the last 30 minutes as I'm standing and speaking clearly shows that you're not a very good listener. I think listening is one of the fundamental skills known yet ignored by top leaders. He said, yeah, I didn't know this. I said, yeah, we can play it back to you. And to come across as a good listener, these are 1, 2, 3 things that I have been doing and a few others have been doing. So they come across as better listeners. He said, Rajiv, this is fantastic. This kind of change I wanted later, chalo karte hain kaam. And that helped me clinch the deal, which was almost a 5-month project with the organization. But it just goes back to the fact that listening, it's so fundamental, right? But we still ignore it. We know it, but we ignore it for whatever reasons. Yeah. I think very, very powerful point. Thanks for bringing that importance of listening back into my head, and I always keep working on that. That takes me to the next one, which is very interesting. The art of influential listening, which is what you spoke. But what is the art of influential listening, as per Adam? People have heard about listening for years. When this gets on LinkedIn, people listen to you and say, listening, tumne bahut suna hua. What is Amit going to say new? But I want to ask you, what is Adam saying new and different?
Yeah. So on this aspect, I think he speaks about this whole motivational interviewing kind of a piece, right? Which is a very interesting concept, right? So in this, asking very open-ended questions wherever possible, right? And reflecting to that listening. And as I spoke about that whole meeting piece, right? In terms of listen, not to respond, right? But listen to absorb.
Right.
On what somebody's saying, and this is very, very commonly seen in meetings today, that people are not listening to respond, and sometimes good ideas are lost about it, especially if your meeting has more people than what it needs. If a meeting is a large meeting, there are also people having pressures on, I need to make my opinion heard, and sometimes you come with your rehearsed opinion, here is what I'm going to say, and in your brain you're not paying any attention to what everyone is saying, you are just preparing your point to say. Right, and that's a big fallacy. So engaging in that whole reflective listening is really, really, really important, right? And then that kind of it avoids putting too much pressure on people to change. It's not putting any pressure on you to change. And you're going with an open mind in that meeting saying, okay, maybe the other person's what they are saying has merit, right? Our egos are much larger than,
Very true.
our growth mindsets.
Yeah,
They're much larger. And
Very
to kind of suspend that ego and put a belief that the other person, what they're saying has some merit and let me listen to that is not an easy thing. Believe me, because we think that is what is going to get us in the victories of lattice versus ladders in our organization.
Very true. I want to ask you a question which is out of what we have been talking. When I was reading this, and tell me if I'm correct, I thought for me to follow the art of influential listening and for me to be open to dance with foes, if I see this as an output, I think the input is the earlier point that we discussed. No, if I start enjoying being wrong, then I'll be open to doing these two. So can I say the joy of being wrong is an input kind of a thing that will help me come up with these kind of outputs of dancing with foes and listening?
I think that's great. I think the connect you makes a lot of sense, Rajiv. And believe me, it's not at all easy to be in a place where you think you're wrong and you're enjoying that.
Yeah,
that's not there. And where I saw an example of this recently, people who have seen the very popular series Big Bang Theory, right? They have done a second edition of that with Little Sheldon, which shows the life of Sheldon when he's a child, and there's a professor with whom he deals with. I have seen that in that series, that professor at some point of time says, oh, wow, so I was wrong. That is wonderful. Now I've learned so much. And I remember that. So I wish all of us had that same joyful reaction to being wrong. But it is the most difficult thing to do. I don't know how Adam even came up with this whole concept in this book, but it's just brilliant. And I don't think it is that easy to do that because our egos are too large.
I agree. I completely agree with what you're saying. Yeah. When we move from a physical format to virtual format, I know the kind of a struggle I had to kill that ego that नहीं हो सकता है ये virtual. And अभी पलट के देखा तो 2 साल निकल गया. I've done tons and tons of virtual today. This seems to be now the easier going back to physical. I had to re-muscle myself to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And it has freed up our at least for learning and development, right?
Yeah.
Earlier, how many training sessions I could do for my organization in a day was dependent on how many rooms are available.
Very true.
Now that resource constraint is gone. I can double or triple things as long as facilitators are available and as long as people are available. Okay. And now with this virtual delivery, it is unlimited. So learning is much more, and learning can happen in all kinds of things. I can have a 2-minute bite on something and a reflective conversation around it. I can have a 5-minute video and a reflective conversation. I can have a full day, half day class with the adequate built in. Anything that is possible today, right? So yes, it has taken a lot for us to kind of change. And every time we do it, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's almost the rocket that goes against the gravity, which is pulling it down and just getting into the free space, right? It takes a lot of absolutely. I'm going to talk about this one, which is very interesting for me. Building cultures of learning at work. That was something which I in fact read that twice. Those pages. It made a lot of sense. What is building cultures of learning as an L&D expert that you've been in this industry for so many years? And what would be few inputs that people can pick from your frameworks?
Yeah. So this whole concept of learning organizations, right? So organizations that are there where it is absolutely safe for you to learn anything that you would want to learn. And that's what kind of has been freeing up the minds of people. Like when you are encouraging people that if you have curiosity for any subject, the organization is making available a bunch of learning resources for you that you are free to get into and learn whatever you would like to learn, right? And you're creating learning artifacts for people that they can freely jump into without having to, for the most part, without having to go and seek anyone's approval to learn anything.
True.
Don't need approvals to learn the basic stuff, right? Obviously, there will be some programs that are only by nomination, and there's a good reason for it. But at any point of time, that should probably, I don't know, not be more than 5 or 10% of your entire arsenal of learning that you are leashing at this organization. Right? And the other part is that there are two aspects that kind of come together to build a learning organization. The one is psychological safety, and interestingly, in the book, what Adam has written is, enough has been said about it, so I'm skipping it. And I know there's this whole seminal work of Amy Edmondson and the other leaders over there. Jean Marie has also kind of done some interesting work in that area, which is really, really good for people to kind of spend their time with. And the second concept is that just by having psychological safety, that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to do things are not going to help, you might kind of create an organization where people are just doing mistakes and not kind of getting ahead. So he kind of explains to put this whole process accountability to kind of keep your entire organization to the learning zone. So the process accountability is all about fine, you have the psychological safety to go and decide what direction you want to go in. You're free to go in that direction. Your organizational hierarchy is not going to come in the way and kind of take you on this, as long as the concepts are clear that here are the 5 things that you can kind of go ahead and do. But the accountability lies on you when it's okay to fail, but if you're failing, you need to kind of learn, and you kind of need to have a system of retros of the past work, what worked for you. And the most important thing is, do we know why we succeeded here in anything that you do?
Beautiful.
Right? Do we know why we failed is very obvious. But if you are bringing a new program around learning, do you know why we succeeded? What worked? What you learned from any of the cohorts that you're putting together, or the pieces that you're putting together? What has worked? What has not worked? What are others doing? Right? That is kind of and there's a very powerful question over there, which is, where there's some curiosity and some doubt, but also it will not make your people defensive when you ask this question. It's like, how do we know that this will work? How do we know that this did work? Or how do we know that this did not work? If we know that, then that is your very nice culture of questioning that you are building in the organization, where everybody is free to do that. And maybe you need to have a base setting conversation where you say, this is the way I'm trying to make our organization a learning organization. These are the kind of questions that I'm going to ask you on. Right. So that everybody is well aware of what is your intent behind asking that question.
Correct. Right? I think that question that you said makes me think, Amit, that what made us succeed is an equally powerful question to ask, which is very right that we many times don't ask because हो गया ना, चल गया, good.
Yeah. We are in celebration mode.
Meeting करा के we ask questions. जब चल रहा है, nobody gets into a meeting and books the conference room.
Yeah. So Rajiv, whenever there's a failure, enough scrutiny and retros will happen, digging into it, right? But when there's a success, only celebration parties will happen.
Very true.
Nobody will get into trying to figure why this program worked, why this learning intervention worked. Right? So that is kind of important.
Very nice.
I think very closer to my own function, but just to generalize it, this will go for anything else. For example, the organization released a benefit. Why is this benefit working for people? Why is this benefit having many more takers than the other?
Very true. I think all the L&D folks, that's a great input for you from Amit, that when you're designing interventions, running interventions, which is working well for you, and your CEO is very happy, and his HR comes and pats on your back, you feel good about it, you run those learning conventions, present it so well, you go to NHRD forums, you go to L&D forums, you do all that, you go up to ASTD and do everything. it's worthwhile to book a conference room and get together and break your head as to why did this damn thing work so beautifully well for you, and how could you replicate this with making certain tweaks to it if it calls for. I think it's a great learning. I mean, that's a good point. Yeah. Honestly, my mind is racing back to my corporate days. I don't think I did that except one occasion, and I don't know why I did that. Not definitely from this thought that you're bringing in. Maybe I just did it subconsciously or unconsciously, but it's worthwhile to consciously book a room and talk about and distill the success metrics as well and figure out. Very, very powerful point. That's fantastic. So as we close this conversation and this is so beautiful chat, I want to ask you the last question. What would be two bullseye advice to the listeners from this book that they could pick?
Sorry, Rajiv, I couldn't hear your question. Could you repeat that once?
Two bullseye advice to the young leaders from this book and the learning that you had.
Okay, great. So the first advice is believe in the power of rethinking, right? It is important, and it is not going to make you a weak person if you get into rethink anything, right? That is really something that I would like to say, that keep that. And the second is, this lesson that is there in the book, that the purpose of listening isn't to affirm our beliefs, it is to evolve your beliefs. Right? And I think these are the absolute two bullseye conversations in this book that I kind of would ask my listeners to kind of just imbibe. It's good to be wrong sometimes, right? That's when you kind of, and believe me, if you ask me how have I evolved as a leader over the last many years, I really kind of understand what kind of a leader I was 20, 25 years ago. And, I have learned so much from my own failures throughout. And the other thing that any organization leader can do is bring out these stories of failures from your life and tell people about it. You will win a large section of the population that will believe in what you say after that a lot more. If you're vulnerable about all of your errors and mistakes and everything that be very open about it. There's nothing to be shy or ashamed of. Absolutely not. Right? That's what learning is. And then kind of be very open to that.
Absolutely. I love the way you said it's not about affirming beliefs, but evolving beliefs. That's a very, very powerful phrase. So thanks for bringing that. Amit, that was a lovely, breezy, smooth conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed this 20-25 minutes of chat with you, and I hope you also had a good time here.
Absolutely, Rajiv. Always wonderful having this conversation with you, and probably I'll hope to come back in any other season with another new book, and wish you a lot of success to you and to TLE.
Thank you so much. Absolute joy. Let's continue reading, and all young leaders, go pick up this book, Think Again by Adam Grant. If you're not picked it, it's not there on your shelf. It's the next buy on your Amazon app. Go ahead and pick it up. It's a fabulous book. Thank you so much, Amit. You have a lovely day ahead. Look forward to seeing you sometime. We are in the same city. Let's catch up.
Thank you, Rajiv. You too. You too have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you again.